My name is Habeeb Akande. I'm an author, sex educator and public speaker. I've published 6 books on race, sex and history, and my latest book is called Kunyaza, The Secret to Female Pleasure, which is basically a book about the Asian practice of Kunyaza, which is, it's a practice to help women squirt or orgasm during heterosexual encounters. It's a tradition that's been practiced for hundreds of years in East and Central Africa, in Rwanda, Uganda and Kenya, in parts of East and Central Africa where men are encouraged from a relatively young age to pleasure their wives, and also women are encouraged to, they're entitled to pleasure, so it tells them about their body. They've got elders in their communities known as sengas, which are female sex educators, and they teach women from a relatively young age prior to getting married and during marriage how they're supposed to enjoy themselves in the bedroom. And what fascinated me about the Kunyaza practice is that it's a tradition which is female-centered and female-orientated, whereas much of what we hear about sex and sex education in the West is generally from the male's perspective and all about the man enjoying himself in the bedroom and the woman pleasuring the man, whereas in the Kunyaza practice, it's all about the man pleasuring the woman and the woman enjoying herself in the bedroom, whether that's by way of an orgasm, female ejaculation or squirting or what have you. But it's a female pleasure, like I said, positive practice, which I kind of wanted to raise awareness that we, in Africa, we have got some traditions which celebrate female sexuality and also teaches sex in a sex positive way. I've also do some workshops for men only, some workshops for couples and some workshops for women, where I teach the practice. Now, many people ask, okay, you've got this practice which has got a reputation of helping women squirt, how does it work? Now, the actual technique itself, it involves a man using his erect penis to stimulate the clitoris and the labia minora. And so what we'll do in the workshop is kind of show people, because many people aren't even aware of what the clitoris looks like, or about the labia minora and the labia majora. So it's about educating people in terms of how the man will stimulate with his erect penis the clitoris and labia minora. But before you do the Kunyaza technique, which is a tapping technique, or you can do it zigzag or horizontally, in order to entice or increase arousal, the woman has to be mentally prepared for Kunyaza. Because some people, when they come to my workshops, they think, okay, if I do this tapping technique, all of a sudden she's going to gush and squirt, and it's like, it doesn't work like that. Before you engage in any form of sexual practice, whether it's Kunyaza or even penetrative intercourse, the woman needs to be mentally aroused and emotionally ready for sex. And that's something which a lot of men aren't aware of, and they're not really, I think there's a lot of lack of education in terms of understanding the difference between sex and sexual pleasure. A lot of people have sex, but not many people have pleasurable sex. And for men, generally, speaking, we look at sex and sexual pleasure the same, or sex and orgasm the same, because 9 times out of 10, if a man is going to have penetrative sex, he more than likely is going to orgasm. Whereas for women, that's not the case, and many women are aware of that. So there's a disconnect, and that's why with the Kunyaza practice, one of the benefits for men is that it teaches them to be patient in the bedroom. It could also help them last longer in the bedroom because they're not thinking about penetrative sex all the time. As men, we've got this ego, and I think why a lot of people are interested or intrigued by squirting, it's a form of sexual applause, because men think, okay, if I can make my lady squirt, then I've kind of quote unquote done a good job. Whereas, for example, with orgasms, because we know that a lot of women fake orgasms in the bedroom, this is something that a lot of men are worried about, because they don't know how quote unquote good they are in the bedroom. So with squirting, it's like, for them, it's like a proof that they've kind of done well in the bedroom.
Why do you think the culture has changed in regards to this Kunyaza technique? The reason why I ask that is because this Kunyaza technique is hundreds of years old, you said. But in the current African climate, parents don't talk about sex. Parents don't teach their children about sex and how to enjoy sex, African parents. So obviously I don't think you have the exact answer, but why do you think culture has changed so much that it's gone from, you said, parents and aunties teaching girls how to, well, not girls, boys and girls, how to enjoy sex and what to do to the current climate that we're in. Like, you're not even allowed to talk about sex. Parents don't talk about sex, they don't teach their children about sex. So, I wouldn't say how, but why do you think it's changed?
I think again, obviously when we're speaking about Africa, there's obviously over 50 countries in Africa, so I'm not speaking like one culture, but generally across the continent, many African countries have adopted a Eurocentric or Victorian Christian understanding about sex. So when the Europeans colonized much of the African continent in the 19th century, we adopted their understanding and their views about sex. So sex being it's just for procreation, which is from like Christianity, Catholicism.
Yeah.
And that wasn't something that was from our Asian culture. Sex was something that was supposed to be a pleasurable act to be enjoyed by both the man and the woman. Whereas when we was colonized, we adopted, like I said, this Christian or this Catholic.
So it's religion.
Well, I'm coming to that because I wouldn't just purely. I would say it's an interpretation of a religion because not every religion has a. So some religions have a sex positive or pleasure positive stance. So, for example, in Hindus, if I were to say the Kama Sutra, many people are aware of the Kama Sutra. When they think of the Kama Sutra, they think of sex positions, not knowing that it's a religious textbook, which is teaching about love, intimacy, and sex. Only 25% of the book actually speaks about sex positions. But when it was translated in the 19th century by a British explorer, they just focused on the sex positions because the British at that time were very prudish. And now when you think about the Kama Sutra, everyone just thinks about the sex positions when that's not what it's about. So that's an example of a religion have a very sex positive or pleasure positive stance towards sex, whereas many Hindus now, they see sex as quite taboo. Similarly, many Africans now, sex is very taboo despite in their cultures or the Asian cultures, it was very pleasure positive and sex positive. So much so that even in Rwanda, where Kunyaza originally is from, sex is still a taboo. They don't really talk about it openly. So if you want to kind of hear about the practice or learn about it, you have to go to rural villages. And BBC also did a documentary recently about the Kunyaza practice, and they went to Rwanda. And they had a very difficult time finding people to speak about it openly. So if you were to ask what is Kunyaza, a lot of people would be like, we don't want to speak about this on camera, we don't want to speak about this to foreigners and things like that. So even in places where it originated from, people are uncomfortable to speak about it.
So there's a variety of factors.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it is because we've adopted a Western, I understand about what sex. Even when we talk about sex, look at some of the words we use: dirty, nasty. It's all kind of derogatory or like demeaning things. Whereas in some other cultures which speak about sex in a positive aspect, they don't use these type of words when they're speaking about sex or our private parts. So I would say for many of us in African Diaspora, we've adopted like a Victorian Christian understanding about sex that it's just for procreation or it's just for the man's benefit, and that's something that I think we do need to change by going back to some of our Asian cultures and embracing mutual pleasure, because again, sex I believe is both for the man and the woman to enjoy.
Okay.